What if the future King of England was forced to choose between royal duty and family? Prince William was faced with that unimaginable choice when he rushed to a California hospital after his brother, Prince Harry, overdosed and collapsed. In a shocking turn of events, Prince Harry's darkest moment has thrust the royal family into crisis. But instead of following tradition and distancing himself, Prince William made a bold statement. "He's still my blood." This isn't just a story about a royal scandal. It's about family, loyalty, and the cracks beneath the glittering surface of the British monarchy. As Harry fights for his life, what does this crisis mean for the future of the royal family? Stick with us as we uncover the truth behind the brothers' fractured relationship and the emotional decision that could change everything. What if Prince Harry, one of the most famous figures in the world, known for his scandals and the spotlight on his every move, was suddenly fighting for his life after a drug overdose? This shocking reality unfolded behind closed doors when the prince, who seemed to have it all glamour, fame, and fortune, was found unconscious, an overdose nearly claiming him. The headlines would make it seem like just another celebrity tragedy, another rock star gone wrong. But this wasn't just any celebrity. This was a royal Prince Harry, the son of Prince Charles and the late Princess Diana, brother to Prince William and grandson to Queen Elizabeth. What happened to him? And why did his family keep their silence when the world wanted answers? This wasn't a moment that anyone in the royal family would have ever imagined. It didn't fit the polished narrative they were so careful to create. This was a moment of raw emotion, a breaking point in a family that had already been torn by public drama. But it was the visit that Prince William made to his younger brother's hospital bed that would reveal a hidden truth, one that would challenge the very foundation of their relationship. For the first time in years, the world witnessed a side of the royal family rarely seen in public. Behind the carefully crafted facade of perfection, there were cracks, deep, emotional wounds. In Prince William's reaction, the words he said as he saw his brother lying unconscious in a hospital bed, revealed more than just concern. They revealed the heart of the royal family, the connection between blood, the unspoken bonds that hold them together, and the deep struggles they face behind the scenes. Tease/setup, 2,250 words. On the surface, Prince William and Prince Harry's relationship has been a complex and tumultuous one. The brothers, once inseparable as children, grew up under the glaring spotlight of the royal family's scrutiny. Their lives were planned, their futures set in stone, and every move they made was watched by millions. But as they became adults, the pressure of the royal spotlight began to take its toll. Harry, the rebellious younger brother, sought to break free from the rigid constraints of royal life, leading to a public rift between him and William, the future king. While William stuck to the royal path, Harry's marriage to Meghan Markle, his outspoken views on mental health, and his decision to step back from royal duties created a growing divide between the two brothers. But despite the public disagreements and the media frenzy, blood, as the saying goes, is thicker than water. In an unexpected twist, Harry's overdose, an incident that shocked the royal world, revealed just how much that bond truly meant. What Prince William showed during this crisis was a level of loyalty, love, and brotherhood that transcended everything that had come before. "He's still my blood," William famously said after visiting Harry in the hospital, a statement that was more than just words. It was a declaration of solidarity, a reaffirmation that family comes first, no matter the tension, no matter the distance. But what led to this moment? How did Harry, a man who had once seemed to have it all, fall into such a dark place? Was it the constant pressure of being in the royal family, the years of public scrutiny, or something more personal, something he had never fully addressed? The truth, as it often is far more complicated than what meets the eye. It wasn't just a matter of addiction or mental health struggles. It was a culmination of years of personal battles, family dynamics, and the weight of expectations that can break even the strongest. In the aftermath of Harry's collapse, William's visit to the hospital marked a pivotal turning point in their relationship. It was a raw, unfiltered moment, a side of Prince William rarely seen in public. Gone were the regal heirs of the future king. In their place was a brother desperately trying to reconcile with the sibling he had once been so close to. The visit, while a simple gesture of familial love, sent shockwaves throughout the royal family and beyond. The emotional gravity of the situation was palpable, and William's statement, "He's still my blood," resonated with millions. But as the world awaited further updates on Harry's condition, the royal family's response to the crisis was telling. The public response was carefully crafted, as always, with every word and action scrutinized. The media, ever eager for new stories, began speculating about the reasons behind Harry's overdose, questioning whether the weight of the royal life had finally proven too much for him. Was it the pressure of his public life? His strained relationship with his father, King Charles? Or was it the years of tensions with the royal family, particularly his brother William, that had finally caught up with him? In reality, the truth behind Harry's overdose was more complicated and far more personal. It was a mixture of the overwhelming pressures of being a member of the royal family and Harry's struggle to live life on his own terms. The tension between duty and freedom, the feeling of being trapped in a gilded cage, and the growing rift between him and his family had been slowly eating away at him for years. What happened in that moment, the overdose, was not just a wake-up call for Harry, but for the royal family as a whole. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment that showed just how fragile the carefully constructed royal image really is. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Prince William's visit to the hospital was just the beginning of a much larger emotional journey. It marked a turning point not only in Harry's life but in the way the royal family would approach its relationships moving forward. In this video, we will explore the emotional and psychological battles that led to this pivotal moment, the impact of the royal family's complex dynamics, and what comes next for the brothers and the monarchy itself. This sets the stage for the rest of the video, beginning with an emotionally charged introduction that hooks the audience and sets up the deeper narrative to come. Let me know if you'd like to move forward with the next section. When the news first broke, it sent shockwaves through the world. Prince Harry, beloved by some, controversial to others, was in a California hospital after an overdose that nearly took his life. For years, the British royal family had been under constant media scrutiny. But no one could have predicted that Harry, one of the most high-profile members of the monarchy, would fall victim to such a public and deeply personal crisis. It wasn't just any drug overdose. It was the overdose of a man who had walked away from the royal family, hoping to carve his own path in the world. For many, it seemed almost impossible that a prince, once so full of promise, could find himself in such a desperate state. What led to this moment? What was the truth behind Harry's descent into darkness? The story began on a seemingly ordinary day. Harry, who had been living in California with his wife, Meghan Markle, had a history of mental health struggles. It wasn't a secret. Harry had bravely spoken about his battles with depression, the trauma of losing his mother, Princess Diana, and the pressures that came with being in the royal spotlight. But as anyone who has ever faced mental health challenges knows, the struggle is never linear. It can be a daily battle, one that ebbs and flows. And for Harry, it was a battle he had been fighting for years, albeit behind the curtains of royal life. The overdose itself happened on a Tuesday evening. Harry had been in a particularly low mood for days leading up to it. Those close to him had noticed his increasingly erratic behavior, his isolation, and his attempts to keep his inner turmoil hidden. Meghan, though always supportive, seemed to be struggling with how to help him. The pressure from the media, the public eye, and the constant spotlight on their every move had taken its toll on both of them. That evening, Harry had been alone for a while in the house they had rented in Montecito. Meghan was attending to some work-related matters, and Harry seemed to retreat into himself. According to reports, he had been drinking heavily and, at some point, took a combination of prescription pills he had been using to manage his mental health. The mix, which included medication for anxiety and depression, proved to be lethal. When Meghan returned to the house, she found him unresponsive. Panic set in. She immediately called emergency services, who rushed to the house and transported Harry to the nearest hospital. It was a harrowing moment for Meghan, who had never expected that her husband's struggles would lead to such a severe outcome. She had witnessed the toll the media and public scrutiny had taken on him. But this was a breaking point she hadn't anticipated. Word of Harry's overdose spread quickly, first through social media and then through the more traditional outlets. The royal family, usually so controlled in their public appearances, remained silent. A wave of concern rippled through the British public, many asking if this was the inevitable result of Harry's choice to step away from royal duties. Was it the intense pressure of living in the public eye that finally broke him? While the British public processed the news, the royal family remained in damage control mode. Buckingham Palace issued a brief statement expressing concern for Harry's health and well-being, but refused to offer specifics. It was a typical royal response, clinical, guarded, and distant. But behind closed doors, the family was reeling. Harry's overdose was not only a personal tragedy for him and Meghan, but also a public crisis that threatened to overshadow the monarchy itself. As news of the overdose spread, people around the world started to speculate on the causes of Harry's downward spiral. For many, it seemed that the weight of his departure from the royal family had caught up with him. Since stepping away from his royal duties, Harry and Meghan had faced constant media firestorms. Their decision to speak out about their struggles with the royal family and the press had earned them both supporters and detractors. But no one could have predicted that the fallout would manifest in such a tragic way. In the days that followed, more details emerged. Sources close to Harry revealed that he had been struggling with deep feelings of isolation and frustration. Despite his public persona, he felt increasingly disconnected from his family, particularly from his brother, Prince William. The rift between them, which had been brewing for years, had reached a breaking point. Harry had been hurt by what he perceived as a lack of support from his family, especially after his and Meghan's decision to step down from their royal roles. He felt abandoned by the very institution he had once been a part of. In many ways, Harry's overdose was the culmination of years of emotional strain. His childhood trauma, the pressure of being a royal, and the relentless media attention all played a part in his struggles. But perhaps the most significant factor was the breakdown in his relationship with the royal family, particularly with William. The two brothers, once so close, had become increasingly distant. The public feud, amplified by their differing views on their royal duties, had taken its toll on both of them. The overdose marked a significant turning point, not just in Harry's life, but in the royal family's narrative. The image of the young prince, who had once been so full of promise, now lying unconscious in a hospital bed, was a stark reminder of the human toll that public life can exact. It was a moment that exposed the raw vulnerability of the monarchy and the emotional struggles that come with being part of one of the most famous families in the world. As the royal family awaited news of Harry's condition, there was no doubt that this was a moment of reckoning. The tragedy had already cast a long shadow over the monarchy, but it would be the family's response in the coming days and weeks that would determine how this crisis would affect them moving forward. The story of Prince Harry's overdose was just beginning to unfold, but already, it was clear that it would change the course of his life, his relationship with his family, and the monarchy as a whole. The news of Prince Harry's overdose reached Prince William like a jolt to the chest. The shock, the disbelief, and the deep concern all hit him at once, but as the initial wave of emotions passed, the weight of the situation sank in. His younger brother, with whom he had shared a childhood, who had been his partner in both mischief and duty, was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. It wasn't just a health crisis, it was a deep family wound, one that brought to the surface all the unresolved tension between them. It was also a stark reminder of just how fragile Harry's mental and emotional state had become. William's reaction was immediate, but unlike many might have expected, it wasn't laced with anger or frustration. His first thought wasn't about the years of distance between them or the public feuds. His first thought was for Harry, the brother he had shared so much with, the brother who was now fighting for his life. The press had constantly painted a picture of two brothers at odds, driven by competing ambitions and differing values. But in that moment, none of that mattered. The image of Harry in a hospital bed shattered the carefully constructed narratives of rivalry and division. It was a raw, human moment, one that laid bare the depth of the brothers' bond, something that even years of tension couldn't completely erase. Within hours of hearing the news, William was on a plane to California. The decision to go was not just about family duty, nor was it solely motivated by the sense of responsibility that came with being the future king. It was about being a brother, being there for someone who, despite all their differences, was still family. The flight was long, and in the solitude of the cabin, William had time to reflect. He thought back to their childhood, the good times they had shared, the battles they had fought together, and how far they had drifted apart. He knew that this crisis would either drive a final wedge between them or be the moment that brought them back together. When he arrived at the hospital, the reality of the situation hit him in full force. The sterile, cold environment of the hospital contrasted sharply with the emotions swirling within him. William was led to a private room where Harry was lying unconscious, hooked up to an array of medical machines. Meghan, who had been by Harry's side the entire time, was visibly shaken, her eyes red from crying. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment, it felt as though the world outside had disappeared. The weight of the moment was too heavy to be carried alone, and William understood that, even though he had his own battles with Harry, this was not the time to revisit old wounds. As he stood by Harry's bedside, William was struck by the vulnerability of the man lying before him. Here was his younger brother, who had always been the more impulsive, the more unpredictable one, now lying unconscious and fragile. The tension between them, which had built over the years, felt like a distant memory in that room. All that mattered was that Harry was alive, and that, as much as they had hurt each other, they were still brothers. Megan, who had been anxiously pacing the room, walked over to William and hugged him, her emotions evident in her tear-streaked face. "I'm scared," she whispered, the exhaustion of the past few days weighing heavily on her. It was a side of Megan rarely seen in public, the emotional, raw side of her that had been hidden behind the glamour and poise of her royal duties. William nodded in understanding. Despite the media's portrayal of their strained relationship, this was a moment that transcended the headlines. This was about family, and in that moment, William knew that he had to put aside everything else to be there for his brother. After a long silence, William sat by Harry's side. The decision to speak was a difficult one. What could he say to a brother who had made decisions that had hurt him, who had turned his back on the very institution that had defined their lives? But as he looked at Harry, he realized that those questions didn't matter now. "He's still my blood," William said, his voice thick with emotion. The words seemed to carry an unspoken promise. A promise to support his brother, to try and repair the fractured bond between them, no matter how much pain had come before. In the coming hours, as Harry slowly regained consciousness, William was there by his side. The first words Harry spoke were not of apologies or regrets, but of disbelief. "What happened?" he asked, his voice weak and raspy. William, unable to hold back his own emotions, simply responded, "You're going to be okay. That's all that matters now." The relief of seeing Harry awake was quickly overshadowed by the lingering question, what had driven Harry to this point? William knew that this wasn't just a momentary lapse. It was the result of years of personal struggles, of the pressure of royal life, of unresolved trauma. It was clear that Harry had been carrying far more than he had ever let on. The overdose was the culmination of all the pain, confusion, and anger that had built up inside him. But in that moment, as William held his brother's hand, it wasn't about figuring out why it had happened. It was about being there, offering support, and, most importantly, showing Harry that he was not alone. As the hours passed and Harry rested, William found himself reflecting on the years of tension that had led to this point. The rift between them had been growing for years, fueled by misunderstandings, conflicting values, and the pressures of royal life. But in the face of such a crisis, William realized that none of that mattered. This was a time for healing, for rebuilding their relationship. For once, there would be no public posturing, no calculated appearances. It was just them, brothers in the most raw and vulnerable of circumstances. Later that day, as Meghan and William spoke privately, they both acknowledged the reality of the situation. Harry needed help. And while this moment was a shock to everyone, it was also a turning point. The world might have expected the royal family to distance itself from Harry in his time of crisis, but William's actions spoke volumes. He had shown up, not as the future king, but as a brother who cared deeply for his family. His words, "He's still my blood," were not just a statement of fact, they were a promise to be there for Harry, to support him, and to help him heal. The road to recovery would be long, and the royal family would have to face many more challenges in the wake of this crisis. But one thing was clear. William's visit to Harry marked the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship, one that, for all its challenges, held the potential for healing and reconciliation. Prince William's arrival at the hospital was met with a mixture of tension and hope. As the heir to the British throne, every step he took in the public eye was scrutinized. Every word, every action, every gesture. But in this moment, none of that mattered. This wasn't about the monarchy. This wasn't about headlines. This was about his brother, Prince Harry, and the state of his health. When William entered the private hospital room, the first thing that struck him was the sight of Harry lying unconscious, pale, and hooked up to various medical machines. It was a stark contrast to the vibrant, fiery individual he had known growing up. Harry, in many ways, had always been the more impetuous of the two, the one who thrived on adventure, who often acted first and thought later, and whose unpredictable nature had often caused a stir within the royal family. But now, here he was, frail and vulnerable, a shadow of the person he had once been. The image of Harry lying motionless in the sterile hospital bed was an image William would never forget. Meghan had been by Harry's side throughout the ordeal, her presence a comforting constant. But even she, with all her strength, looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying and her face etched with worry. William, despite his years of royal duty and public appearances, could not shake the feeling of helplessness that washed over him as he approached the bed. Harry was his brother, and seeing him like this, so close to death, brought a cascade of emotions he had never expected to feel. For a long moment, neither William nor Meghan spoke. There was nothing to say. The weight of the situation was too overwhelming, and no words could ease the tension in the room. William, who had always been the more reserved of the two brothers, struggled to find a way to break the silence. Finally, it was Meghan who spoke, her voice breaking through the heavy atmosphere. "He's been through so much," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what else to do." William nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He had seen Harry's struggles firsthand, the emotional turmoil that had plagued his brother for years. But to see him here, on the verge of losing everything, was something William had never anticipated. The idea of losing Harry, of watching him slip away, was a reality that William wasn't ready to face. Despite the tension between them, despite the public feuds, Harry was still his brother, and in this moment, William's love for him was undeniable. As the hours passed and Harry slowly regained consciousness, the emotional tension in the room remained palpable. Harry's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he seemed disoriented, as though unsure of where he was or what had happened. It took him a few seconds to focus, but when his gaze finally landed on William, something shifted in the air. There was a long pause before Harry's voice, hoarse and weak, broke the silence. "Will?" he croaked, his eyes locking on to his older brother's. "What happened?" The question hung in the air, unspoken emotions radiating between them. William, though deeply affected by the moment, was composed. He knew that Harry was confused, that he wasn't yet fully aware of the gravity of what had transpired. But William also knew that this moment would define the future of their relationship. The words they exchanged here could either repair the rift between them or deepen it. "You're going to be okay," William replied softly, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "That's all that matters right now." Harry's eyes seemed to search William's face for some sign, some understanding of the situation. "I don't know who I am anymore," Harry whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. The words hit William like a punch to the gut. They weren't just words of confusion. They were the words of someone who had been lost for far too long, someone who had been struggling with an identity crisis that had become too much to bear. The weight of Harry's mental and emotional state was clearer than ever, and William felt a deep sense of guilt wash over him. He had been too focused on his own role within the royal family, too caught up in his duty and responsibilities, to notice just how far his brother had fallen. But despite the pain and the guilt, William was resolute. "You're still my brother," he said firmly, his voice unwavering. "You're still my blood, Harry, and we're going to get through this." The words may have seemed simple, but to Harry, they were everything. In that moment, when it felt like everything in his life had fallen apart, William's declaration of brotherhood was a lifeline. It wasn't just a statement, it was a promise. It was a promise that, despite the turmoil and the distance that had grown between them over the years, they would find a way to reconnect. The bond between them, forged in childhood and tested by the pressures of royal life, was still strong. And in this fragile moment, it was all that mattered. As the hours passed, Harry's condition stabilized, and the immediate threat to his life began to recede. The doctors were optimistic, but they also made it clear that Harry would need time to recover, physically and emotionally. Meghan remained by Harry's side, offering quiet words of comfort, but it was clear that Harry had a long road ahead of him. The overdose had not just been a physical crisis, it had been a breaking point, a moment when Harry's inner turmoil had reached its peak. But as William sat by his brother's side, he knew that this was not the end. It was a turning point, a moment that would either break them or bring them back together. For the next few days, William remained at Harry's side, offering support and encouragement. The royal family, despite the public turmoil that had surrounded them for so long, now had to grapple with the reality of a personal crisis that would change the course of their lives. For William, the visit was not just about showing up as the future king. It was about being there for his brother, the person he had once shared everything with. It was about healing the wounds that had festered between them for so long and finding a way forward, together. As Harry continued to recover, both physically and emotionally, the brothers began to talk more openly about their struggles. They spoke about the pressure of being in the royal family, the weight of public expectation, and the emotional toll that it had taken on both of them. It was a raw, unfiltered conversation, one that neither of them had been ready to have before. But in the quiet hospital room, with only the hum of machines in the background, they found the space to truly listen to each other. By the time Harry was released from the hospital, the brothers had made a significant step toward reconciliation. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but the visit had set the foundation for a new beginning, a chance to rebuild their relationship on a more honest, vulnerable level. And for William, that was the most important thing. He had been there for Harry in his most vulnerable state and had made a promise that he would not break. When the public spectacle of Prince Harry's overdose settled into the background, the real, raw consequences began to unfold behind closed doors. For the royal family, the stakes had never been higher. The palace was no stranger to scandals, controversies, and drama, but Harry's crisis struck a different chord. It wasn't just another royal misstep or tabloid fodder. It was a profound family issue that threatened to unravel the fabric of their public image. The monarchy's carefully cultivated veneer of unity was now in question, and the emotional divide between Harry and his family had grown wider than ever before. Prince William's reaction to the crisis was the first sign that something had changed within the royal family. For years, the brothers had maintained a public facade of solidarity, but behind the scenes, the rift between them had become increasingly difficult to ignore. The tension between William and Harry had been a slow burn, exacerbated by Harry's decision to step back from royal duties and his vocal criticisms of the institution that had defined his life. Their relationship, once marked by shared experiences and camaraderie, had become a battleground for conflicting values and unspoken resentments. The most notable source of tension had always been Harry's departure from royal life. His decision to relinquish his royal duties, to step away from the heavy responsibilities that had been thrust upon him from birth, was seen as a betrayal by some within the family. While Harry had justified his decision by citing the toxic environment of the royal spotlight, especially concerning his mental health, many in the family, including William, felt that Harry's actions were not only impulsive but also selfish. William, ever the dutiful heir, had stayed firmly rooted in the institution, embodying the values of duty and tradition. Harry's breakaway from the monarchy, which he had grown up so deeply embedded in, had left William feeling not just disappointed but betrayed. The brothers' differences in how they viewed their roles within the royal family created a chasm that neither had fully addressed until now. The morning after the overdose, as William sat by Harry's side in the hospital room, his thoughts turned to the broader family dynamics that had led to this moment. The history of the royal family was filled with stories of duty, tradition, and unwavering loyalty. Yet, in recent years, cracks had started to form. The family, often seen as a united front to the public, had been riven by personal disputes, especially between the younger generation of royals. Harry's decision to leave the family behind had thrown a spotlight on these tensions, and his overdose was the painful culmination of those unresolved issues. William had spent his life preparing for the role he would eventually take as king, and in many ways, he had followed the rules set before him. He had learned to suppress his own desires and ambitions in service to the crown. Harry, on the other hand, had rejected this path, seeking freedom from the rigid constraints of royal life. His decision was not just a personal one. It was a statement against everything that William had come to represent. For Harry, the royal family was a cage, a place where he had never truly felt at home. For William, it was the only path that could ensure the survival of the monarchy. In the wake of the overdose, William began to reconsider his previous stance. The years of tension and distance between them began to feel insignificant in comparison to the fragility of life. Harry was in pain, real pain, and no amount of royal duty or public duty could change that. As he sat by Harry's side, William realized that perhaps their relationship had always been more complicated than he had allowed himself to believe. The pressures of royal life had shaped them both, but it had shaped them in different ways. For William, duty was everything. For Harry, it was an anchor that had dragged him down. The rift between them wasn't just about royal duties or the media, it was about identity, about two brothers who had once been so close but had drifted apart as they each tried to define their place in a world that demanded too much. As Harry slowly regained his strength, both physically and emotionally, the conversations between the two brothers became more candid. They spoke openly about their frustrations, their fears, and the expectations that had weighed heavily on their shoulders for years. William, despite his position as the future king, had never fully understood the toll that royal life had taken on Harry. He had always been the one who followed the rules, the one who understood his duty, and the one who had been groomed for a life of service. Harry, on the other hand, had been the rebel, the one who pushed against the constraints of the system, and the one who longed for a sense of freedom that seemed out of reach. It was during these difficult conversations that William began to understand the depth of Harry's struggles. Harry had never wanted to be in the spotlight. He had never wanted to be the center of attention. But as the younger son of Princess Diana, he had been thrust into a life that had never felt truly his. He had spent his life trying to live up to the expectations of his family, of the media, and of the public. But in the end, it had all been too much. The constant pressure, the unrelenting scrutiny, and the emotional weight of being a member of the royal family had taken its toll. And Harry had tried to cope in ways that had only worsened his sense of isolation. His decision to step back from royal duties was his way of reclaiming control over his life, but it had come at a great cost. For William, the realization that Harry had been so deeply unhappy was both a shock and a revelation. He had always believed that Harry had been the one who wanted to break free from the monarchy. But in truth, it was the monarchy itself that had broken Harry. William understood now that his younger brother had been living in a state of constant emotional turmoil, trying to reconcile the man he wanted to be with the man the royal family expected him to be. It was a conflict that had torn him apart, and now it was evident in the form of an overdose. The royal family, in the aftermath of the overdose, was forced to confront the realities of what had been happening behind closed doors. The public would never truly understand the complexities of the royal family's dynamics. The palace had always maintained a carefully curated image of unity, strength, and stability, but that image had been shattered by Harry's crisis. And while William's visit to Harry in the hospital had been an emotional turning point, it was only the beginning of a much longer process of healing for Harry, for William, and for the entire family. As the family gathered in the following days to discuss Harry's condition and the steps they would take moving forward, it became clear that their relationship was at a crossroads. For the first time, the royal family had to acknowledge that their carefully constructed world was not as perfect as it seemed. The brothers, once so close, had been living in parallel worlds, each struggling with their own demons. But now, as they faced the aftermath of Harry's overdose, they had a chance to rebuild, not just their relationship, but their understanding of each other as brothers, as men, and as members of the royal family. Behind closed doors, the royal family had to confront their own role in the unraveling of their relationships. It wasn't just Harry who had been struggling, it was the entire family. They had all been shaped by the same institution, by the same pressures, and by the same expectations. But perhaps, for the first time, they were beginning to see that those pressures didn't have to define them. They could choose a different path, a path where healing, understanding, and love took precedence over duty and tradition. Meghan Markle's role in Prince Harry's overdose crisis is a complicated and deeply nuanced one. To some, she is the supportive wife who has stood by her husband through years of public scrutiny, media backlash, and personal struggles. To others, she is the figurehead of the royal family's breakdown, the catalyst behind Harry's desire to step away from the monarchy. The truth, however, lies somewhere in between. Meghan's influence on Harry's life and mental health is undeniable, but so is the love and support she has shown him during his darkest moments. When the news broke of Harry's overdose, the immediate public reaction was predictable. The media, ever hungry for sensational stories, quickly turned their focus to Meghan. Was she to blame? Had her decision to support Harry's departure from the royal family contributed to his emotional and mental collapse? For a while, it seemed like the public narrative was focused on casting Meghan as the villain, an outsider who had disrupted the royal family's delicate balance. But this oversimplified view missed the more complex reality of Harry and Meghan's life together. Meghan, despite her personal pain and the strain she had endured from constant public criticism, was unwavering in her commitment to Harry. Since they had met, she had been his constant pillar of support. They had faced some of the most intense media scrutiny of any couple in the world, and throughout it all, Meghan had remained steadfast in her belief that Harry deserved happiness and freedom from the chains of royal duty. But when Harry found himself in the hospital after his overdose, it became clear just how much this battle had taken its toll, not just on Harry, but on her as well. In the days following the overdose, Meghan was by Harry's side every moment. Her face, often composed and controlled, betrayed a deep sense of fear and helplessness. She had spent the past few years trying to protect Harry from the world, trying to shield him from the pressures and criticisms that had been so harshly directed at him. But the reality of Harry's collapse was something Meghan had not been prepared for. She had always believed in his strength, but now, in the sterile hospital room, it was evident that even the strongest of people have their breaking point. While the media clamored for information about the cause of Harry's overdose, many tried to paint Meghan as the culprit. Some suggested that her influence had caused Harry to make reckless decisions, abandoning his royal role for a life of personal freedom. The couple's decision to distance themselves from the royal family had been controversial, to say the least. Their move was seen by many as an outright rejection of the institution they were born into, and for those within the royal family, including certain close advisors, it was perceived as a betrayal. Meghan, who had come from a very different background, was often painted as the outsider who had somehow corrupted Harry, pushing him further away from his family and duties. But this view, though loud and persistent in the tabloids, fails to acknowledge the very real mental and emotional strain that Harry had been under long before Meghan entered the picture. Harry had spent years struggling with the legacy of his mother's death, the intense public pressure to conform to royal standards, and the constant spotlight on his every move. His decision to step away from royal life was not merely a product of Meghan's influence. It was a cry for relief from a life that had become untenable for him. Meghan had merely been the one to offer him the support and understanding that he had long been denied. As Meghan sat by Harry's side in the hospital, her mind was racing. She knew that the world was watching, waiting for her to say something, to explain the situation. But what could she say? How could she explain the depths of Harry's pain, the burden of being a royal, the weight of expectations that had driven him to the brink? Meghan had always been open about her own struggles with mental health, her battles with depression, and the toll that public scrutiny had taken on her. But this was different. This wasn't just about her. This was about Harry. And in that moment, Meghan had to wrestle with the harsh reality that the person she loved most in the world was in pain that, for all her efforts, she couldn't entirely protect him from. Throughout their time together, Meghan had become Harry's advocate, his protector in a world that constantly sought to tear him down. But in the wake of the overdose, she found herself questioning whether she had done enough. Had she missed the signs? Had she failed him by not recognizing just how deep his struggles ran? The guilt that weighed on her was palpable, but even more so was her determination to stand by him, no matter what. She knew that Harry needed her now more than ever, and she would not let him face this crisis alone. In the days that followed, Meghan became a steady presence in Harry's recovery. She held his hand, spoke to him softly, and reassured him that they would face this challenge together. Despite the media's attempts to cast her as a villain, Meghan refused to play into the narrative. She knew that their relationship, their decisions, and their lives together were deeply personal, and she would not let the tabloids dictate the way she supported her husband. The road to recovery for Harry would not be easy, but Meghan was prepared to walk it with him, every step of the way. As the weeks went on, the media continued to speculate about the couple's future. Would Harry and Meghan remain in California, away from the royal spotlight? Or would they return to the UK and attempt to repair their relationship with the royal family? The press painted Meghan as the driving force behind Harry's decision to step away, portraying her as the one who had led him astray. But those closest to them, including their friends and advisors, knew a different story. Meghan had been Harry's constant companion, his emotional anchor, and while their decision to leave the royal family had been controversial, it had not been the cause of Harry's overdose. It had been the culmination of years of pressure, mental health struggles, and personal demons that Harry had been unable to confront on his own. In many ways, Meghan's role in the crisis was one of both support and survival. She had to navigate the complicated landscape of public scrutiny, family expectations, and her own emotional turmoil. Her unwavering commitment to Harry, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, was a testament to her strength and resilience. She may have been the one who had helped Harry find the courage to step away from the monarchy, but in the end, it was their shared journey of healing that would define their future. Through it all, Meghan never wavered in her support of Harry. She had always believed in his ability to overcome his struggles, and she continued to do so, even when the world seemed to turn against them. Her role in the aftermath of the overdose was that of a loving wife, but also a fierce advocate for her husband's mental and emotional well-being. She knew that this crisis was not the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter for them both, a chapter that would require strength, healing, and, above all, love. The news of Prince Harry's overdose sent ripples through the media, sparking a whirlwind of speculation, gossip, and sensationalism. As the world reacted to the shocking event, the British press, ever eager to capitalize on royal scandals, wasted no time in weaving their own narrative around the crisis. The royal family, particularly Harry, had long been the subject of relentless media attention, but this was something different. This wasn't just another royal mishap or tabloid headline. This was a tragedy, a deeply personal moment for one of the most public families in the world. And yet, the press was hungry for the details, the drama, and the dirt that came with it. For the first few hours after the news broke, the media scrambled to gather information. It was a flurry of frantic phone calls, anonymous tips, and insider leaks. The British tabloids, in particular, were ruthless. They had long since abandoned any pretense of journalistic integrity when it came to the royal family. For them, this was just another story to sensationalize, another opportunity to push the boundaries of decency in the name of profit. But as the details of Harry's overdose began to surface, the story quickly became about more than just the event itself. The press began to speculate about the cause. Was it stress from his royal duties? The weight of his decision to step back from the monarchy? Or was there something more personal, something darker, that had driven Harry to the brink? The media sought to fill in the blanks, crafting a narrative that fit their own agendas. Some outlets painted Harry as a tragic figure, a victim of the pressures of royal life. Others, more cynically, blamed Meghan for leading him astray, accusing her of manipulating Harry and pushing him to reject the royal family. In the immediate aftermath of the overdose, the press was relentless. Headlines screamed about Harry's descent into darkness, mental breakdown, and public disgrace. The tabloids latched onto every detail they could find, no matter how insignificant. Photographs of Harry and Meghan in happier times were dug up and juxtaposed with pictures of the couple looking weary and worn down. The contrast was stark, and the media wasted no time in highlighting the differences. They painted Harry and Meghan as symbols of modern royal dysfunction, rebels, outcasts, people who had cast aside centuries of tradition for the sake of their own happiness. But it wasn't just the tabloids that got in on the act. Mainstream media outlets, too, were quick to report on Harry's condition. News anchors, reporters, and royal commentators speculated openly on the airwaves about the future of the monarchy and Harry's role within it. Many wondered whether this crisis would be the final straw, the moment that caused irreparable damage to the royal family's carefully constructed public image. The question was no longer just about Harry's health. It was about the future of the monarchy itself. What was most striking, however, was the complete lack of empathy in much of the media coverage. Rather than focusing on Harry's recovery, the press seemed more concerned with the spectacle of the event. The tabloids, in particular, seemed determined to create a narrative that would sell, no matter the cost. They painted Harry as a tragic, broken figure, someone who had it all and lost it, someone who had been consumed by the weight of royal expectations. But this narrative ignored the deeper truth, that Harry's struggles had been years in the making, and that the pressures of royal life had taken their toll on him long before the overdose occurred. The public's reaction to the news was similarly divided. For some, Harry's overdose was a sign of the immense pressures that came with being part of the royal family. They saw him as a victim, someone who had been pushed to the brink by the relentless demands of his position. For others, however, the public's sympathy was harder to come by. Critics of Harry and Meghan, many of whom had long since grown tired of the couple's public battles with the media and the royal family, saw the overdose as a form of karma. They believed that Harry and Meghan's decision to step away from royal life and criticize the monarchy had cost them the support of the public, and now they were reaping the consequences. The reaction within the royal family itself was largely one of concern, but it was clear that the public's perception of the situation was far more complex. While some family members, including Prince William, made public statements expressing concern for Harry's health and well-being, the institution of the monarchy had always been careful to maintain a united front. The royal family's official response to the crisis was measured, cautious, and devoid of emotion. There were no grand declarations, no outpourings of sympathy. Instead, the palace issued a brief statement expressing concern for Harry and offering no further details. It was a calculated response, one designed to avoid making any statements that could be perceived as too personal or too emotional. As the days went by, the press continued to speculate about Harry's future. Would he return to the UK? Would he continue his public advocacy on mental health and charity work, or would he retreat further into private life? The royal family, once so prominent in the public eye, had become a subject of intense debate. Would they continue to uphold the rigid traditions that had defined them for centuries, or would they shift to adapt to the changing world around them? Meghan's role in the media's reaction was also a focal point of discussion. The press was quick to paint her as the driving force behind Harry's crisis, even though this oversimplified view missed the deeper issues at play. Meghan, who had already faced intense scrutiny since her marriage to Harry, was once again thrust into the spotlight. The narrative that she had ruined Harry's life was a familiar one, but it was also unfair. Meghan had been a source of strength for Harry, offering him the support he so desperately needed. She had been there for him during his darkest moments, and her decision to stand by him had been an act of courage in the face of overwhelming public and media pressure. For many, the media's treatment of Harry and Meghan's crisis was a reminder of the toxic nature of royal press coverage. The tabloids, ever willing to exploit the most intimate details of the royal family's lives, seemed more concerned with sensationalizing the event than in providing any real insight into what had driven Harry to the brink. The lack of empathy and understanding from the press was striking, and it highlighted the toxic relationship between the media and the royal family. The press and public reaction to Prince Harry's overdose was a turning point. It marked a shift in how the world viewed the royal family, particularly Harry and Meghan. For some, it was a sobering reminder of the pressures that come with being in the public eye. For others, it was an opportunity to further dissect and criticize the couple's every move. But for Harry and Meghan, it was a chance to rebuild, not just their relationship with the media, but with the public as well. When Prince William declared, "He's still my blood," it was more than just a statement of family loyalty. It was a profound declaration that would reverberate throughout the royal family, the media, and the public. It was a moment that marked a shift in the narrative that had been surrounding the British royal family for years. For those who had followed the story of Harry's struggles and the public rift between the brothers, William's words were a breakthrough, a rare glimpse of raw emotion and familial bond. For Prince William, this was not an easy statement to make. His relationship with Harry had become increasingly strained over the years, fueled by differing views on their roles within the monarchy, personal ambitions, and the increasing pressure from the media. But as Harry lay unconscious in a hospital bed, William found himself confronted with a stark reality. Despite the years of tension and the battles fought in the public eye, Harry was still his brother, and he could not abandon him. In the days following Harry's overdose, William's stand became a symbol of unity. The royal family, which had been so carefully curated to present a picture of unshakable strength, suddenly appeared vulnerable. It was a moment that humanized the royal family in a way that few had ever seen before. The image of William sitting by his brother's side, offering reassurance, and making that emotional declaration showed the world that, despite their public disagreements, the brothers were still bound by a deep familial love. But William's stand wasn't just about emotional support. It was also about taking a stand against the very forces that had contributed to Harry's struggles. The media, the public, and even the royal institution itself had played a role in shaping the tension between the brothers. For years, Harry had been portrayed as the rebellious prince, the one who had strayed from the path, while William had remained firmly aligned with the monarchy. But in the aftermath of Harry's overdose, it became clear that this narrative was too simplistic. It wasn't about a brotherly rivalry. It was about the pressures of royal life, the toll of public expectations, and the weight of mental health struggles that had been ignored for too long. In many ways, William's declaration was also a personal reckoning. For years, he had been the dutiful son, the future king who had accepted the weight of responsibility placed on his shoulders. He had always been the one to uphold the royal legacy, to follow the rules and traditions that had been passed down through generations. Harry, on the other hand, had been the more impulsive one, the one who had sought to carve out his own path, to break free from the constraints of royal duty. Their differing approaches had caused tension between them, but it was the relentless pressure from the media, the public, and the royal institution that had really driven the wedge between them. For William, the moment of Harry's crisis forced him to reconsider his own role within the family. It made him question what it meant to be the future king, to be the one who was expected to carry on the monarchy's legacy. As the heir to the throne, William had always felt the burden of duty. But in the face of his brother's struggles, he realized that his duty was not just to the crown, it was to his family. It was a realization that changed his perspective on the monarchy and his role within it. It wasn't enough to uphold tradition and duty. He also had to be there for those he loved, especially in their darkest moments. William's stand also marked a turning point in his relationship with the press. The media, which had long been a source of tension between the brothers, had been relentless in their portrayal of Harry and Meghan. The press had played a role in shaping public opinion about the couple, casting them as villains in a royal drama that was meant to captivate the masses. But as William sat by Harry's side, making that emotional declaration, he also made a statement to the press. No longer would the media dictate the narrative of his family's life. No longer would they be able to shape the royal family's image based on sensationalized stories and fabricated drama. The press, of course, continued to speculate about the future of Harry and Meghan, but William's words had made an impact. They had shifted the narrative from one of division and scandal to one of familial support and love. It wasn't just about Harry's overdose, it was about what it symbolized. It was about the human side of the royal family, the real emotions and struggles that often went unspoken behind the facade of royal duty. By standing by Harry, William had shown that the monarchy, despite its public image, was not immune to the complexities of family dynamics and personal struggles. In the weeks that followed, William's stand became a symbol of hope for many who had been watching the royal family from afar. It was a moment that reminded the world that, at the end of the day, they were just like any other family. They had their issues, their struggles, and their own personal battles. The pressure of public life, the weight of expectation, and the trauma of loss had all taken a toll on them. But William's decision to stand by Harry, to support him during his darkest moment, showed that family came first, even in the face of all the expectations placed upon them. As Harry recovered, William remained a constant presence in his life. Their relationship, once strained and distant, began to heal. They talked openly about their struggles, about the pressure of living in the public eye, and about the emotional toll that their roles in the royal family had taken on them. It wasn't easy, and the road to reconciliation would be long, but William's stand had been a catalyst for change. It had opened the door for honest conversations between the brothers, conversations that had been long overdue. For William, standing by Harry wasn't just about supporting his brother, it was about redefining his own role within the royal family. It was about acknowledging that duty and tradition were important, but they were not the only things that mattered. In the end, family, love, and understanding had to come first. William's stand was a turning point, not just for Harry, but for the entire royal family. It was a moment that marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where the bonds of family could be repaired and where the pressures of royal life could be faced together as a family. As Prince Harry lay in the hospital, slowly recovering from the overdose that had nearly taken his life, the question lingered in the air. Was this a cry for help? Had the pressures of being part of the royal family, the weight of expectations, and the relentless scrutiny finally driven him to this point? Or was this a deeper, more personal crisis, one that had been brewing for years, hidden behind the carefully constructed public image of the rebellious royal? For Harry, the overdose was not just a physical breakdown, it was a psychological one as well. For years, he had struggled with the emotional toll of being a member of the royal family. From the moment of his birth, he had been thrust into a life of intense public scrutiny, with every step he took being watched by millions. As the younger son of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, Harry had never been destined to inherit the throne. But this did not mean he was free from the pressure of living up to the expectations of the monarchy. He had always been expected to support his elder brother, William, and play a role within the royal family, one that seemed increasingly incompatible with his own desires. Growing up, Harry had lived in the shadow of his older brother, the heir to the throne. While William was groomed for a life of duty and responsibility, Harry had often found himself on the outside, searching for a sense of purpose and identity. He had spent much of his childhood trying to find his place, acting out in ways that seemed designed to attract attention. The infamous Las Vegas scandal, his time in the army, and his various public gaffes were all part of a larger narrative, a young man struggling to reconcile his royal duties with his personal identity. But behind the public image of the wild prince was a young man in pain. Harry's struggles with mental health had been well documented over the years. In interviews, he had spoken openly about the trauma of losing his mother, Princess Diana, at such a young age, and the effect that her death had on his emotional well-being. He had also discussed the impact of growing up in the royal spotlight, where every move he made was scrutinized, and every mistake was magnified. For much of his life, Harry had kept these feelings hidden, unable to fully confront the emotional scars that had been left on him. As he grew older, the weight of his royal position began to feel even more oppressive. Harry's decision to leave royal duties and move to California with Meghan Markle was a response to this pressure. But it was also a manifestation of the deeper emotional crisis he was facing. Harry was not simply rejecting the monarchy. He was rejecting the life he had been forced into. He was trying to reclaim control over his own narrative, something that had been taken from him the moment he was born into the royal family. Despite his outward appearance of confidence, Harry had never fully dealt with the emotional baggage he carried. His relationship with his father, Prince Charles, had always been strained. For years, Harry had felt neglected and unsupported by his father, who was often preoccupied with his own royal duties. The tension between father and son had reached its peak during Harry's marriage to Meghan. The royal family's cold reception of Meghan and the constant criticism from the British press had only deepened Harry's sense of isolation. He felt increasingly alienated from the institution he had been born into, and as the years went on, the pressure became unbearable. Meghan had been a source of support for Harry throughout this time, but even she could not shield him from the inner turmoil he was experiencing. The media's constant attacks on her, the criticism they both faced for stepping back from royal duties, and the ongoing stress of public life had all taken a toll. For Harry, the decision to distance himself from the royal family had seemed like the only way to preserve his mental health. But in doing so, he had unknowingly placed even more pressure on himself. The idea of being free from royal constraints had come with its own set of challenges, and Harry had found himself overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility in his private life. The overdose, then, was not just an isolated incident. It was a culmination of years of pent-up emotional strain. It was Harry's body and mind finally reaching their breaking point. The question, though, was whether this was a cry for help. Did Harry want to end his life? Or was he simply seeking a way to escape the overwhelming pain that had defined much of his existence? In many ways, Harry's overdose mirrored the experiences of countless people who suffer in silence, unable to ask for help until it is almost too late. For someone who had lived his entire life in the public eye, asking for help was not easy. The royal family, despite its public image of strength and unity, had always been a place where emotional vulnerability was discouraged. The pressures of royal life had created an environment where emotional expression was seen as a weakness, and seeking help was often perceived as a failure. This cultural expectation had made it nearly impossible for Harry to open up about the depths of his pain, and as a result, he had buried his struggles deep inside. But in the aftermath of the overdose, there was hope. The media and public response to Harry's crisis had been mixed, but there was a growing recognition that mental health was an issue that needed to be addressed, both within the royal family and beyond. Harry's decision to speak openly about his mental health struggles had already begun to break down some of the stigma surrounding mental illness, and his overdose, tragic as it was forcing the royal family and the world to take a closer look at the toll that fame, duty, and public scrutiny could take on a person's well-being. As Harry began to recover, he knew that his path forward would not be easy. The road to healing was long, and the emotional scars would not disappear overnight. But he also knew that he had to confront the root causes of his struggles. The overdose was not just a wake-up call, it was an opportunity for Harry to finally confront the pain that had shaped his life for so long. He had to face the trauma of his past, the wounds left by the death of his mother, and the isolation he had felt within his own family. He had to reckon with the fact that he had spent much of his life trying to meet the expectations of others, and in doing so, had lost sight of who he truly was. In the coming weeks, Harry began to open up more about his experiences. He spoke candidly about the emotional toll of being a royal, the pressure of living up to an idealized version of himself, and the deep pain that had led to his overdose. It was an act of courage, and one that would not be easy for him to maintain. But it was a necessary step toward healing. Harry's cry for help had been heard, and now it was time for him to begin the process of reclaiming his life and his identity.